Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. Welcome to our daily Hindu analysis. BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS presents to you an important workshop which will be conducted by Mukesh Jha sir on the 10th of April at 11 a.m. on how to prepare for Civil Services 2023. So those aspirants who are preparing for the next year, they shouldn't miss this session and kindly register for the workshop by using the link provided in the description box below. Then for Friday's explained session at 8 p.m. on our YouTube channel, Anubhav sir is going to discuss and decode the important Criminal Procedure Identification Bill which has been passed recently in the Parliament. So for an in-depth understanding of the topic, don't miss tomorrow's explained session at 8 p.m. on our YouTube channel. With this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by looking at a column from page number 6 of the Delhi edition. The column is written by Rakesh Sood, the former Indian ambassador to Nepal, and he examines the complex nature of India-Nepal relations following the recent visit of Nepal's Prime Minister to India. Here, I would also suggest you to watch the interview that we conducted with Ambassador Rakesh Sood under our interview guidance program to get a better insight on India's foreign policy, particularly on India's relations with Nepal. The link for this video can also be found in the description box below. See, India has always shared a close and special relationship with Nepal. Nepal, being a Himalayan state sandwiched between India and China, has always been a key neighbor for India as it forms a security buffer against the aggression of China. The two countries share close cultural and historical links as a result of the religious connection offered by Hinduism and Buddhism, and this forms the foundation of the civilizational relationship that is shared between the two countries. So post-independence, the two countries decided to build a strong foundation for their relationship through the 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship, which recognizes the close historical and civilizational links between the two sides. The treaty recognizes the close people-to-people relations, and to take this forward, it provided for a system of open borders to facilitate the free movement of people and goods between the two countries, and also accords national treatment to each other's citizens, which has particularly benefited Nepal as Nepal is a landlocked country. As a result of open borders and national treatment accorded under the 1950 treaty, Nepal has been able to connect with Indian roads and railway networks to access Indian seaports on the east coast, and it has also allowed Nepali citizens to come to India to study and work in the country. So in many ways, India is critical for Nepal's economic sustenance, and even its national currency has been pegged to the Indian rupee. Since many decades, India has also been a major investor in the country and has funded several important connectivity projects and other socio-economic projects under its development assistance. But despite these close ties, the relationship has become complex over the years, especially because of Nepal's allegations that India has always interfered in Nepal's internal affairs. This was reflected during Nepal's civil war triggered by the Maoists in the 1990s, which eventually was brought to an end with India's intervention in 2005-2006. Nepal has also witnessed a lot of political turmoil and instability, and during all these instances, India has been closely involved in stabilizing the country. So this had often led to allegations that India excessively interferes in Nepal's internal affairs. And based on this, several Nepali politicians were often promoting anti-India sentiments in order to raise Nepali nationalism, and were often seen to be siding with China or even with Pakistan to threaten the core Indian interests in Nepal. As a result, we witnessed a rise in Pakistan-sponsored terrorism via the Nepali route, along with a significant increase in organized crime along the India-Nepal border. China, on the other hand, was seen to be cultivating Nepali politicians who could act on its behalf to promote anti-India sentiments in order to cut Indian influence in Nepal. Then post-2006, as Nepal transitioned into a democratic republic secular state, Nepal began the process of drafting its constitution from 2008 onwards. And until 2015, it couldn't finalize its constitution as a result of the demands and concerns that were raised by the Madhesi community who have close links with India. India tried to ensure that Nepal's constitution would be equitable and inclusive to respect the rights and demands of Madhesis. But this was again construed as India's interference in Nepal's internal process, which again contributed to the rise of anti-India sentiments. Then finally in 2015, when Nepal adopted its constitution, the Madhesis from the Terai belt, that is from the southern plains of Nepal, who were unhappy with the constitution, they blocked the India-Nepal border roads and staged protests, thus resulting in an economic blockade against Nepal. During this economic blockade, Nepal again blamed India for the crisis and held India responsible for triggering the economic blockade. This further contributed to the rise of anti-India sentiments, despite India adopting its neighborhood first policy and giving utmost priority to Nepal in its relations. After Prime Minister Modi came to power in 2014, he launched the neighborhood first policy of India to prioritize relations with the neighboring countries and also paid the first important visit to Nepal, during which India promised to address all the concerns of Nepal. But despite this, the complex relations have continued, and recently in 2020, Nepal triggered the border dispute between the two countries, which until then had remained dormant for centuries. India-Nepal had a minor border dispute at Kala Pani and Susta, which traces its origin to the Treaty of Sugauli that was signed between British India and the then Kingdom of Nepal. This treaty, signed in the 1800s, following the Anglo-Nepal War, marked the boundaries between British India and the Nepali Kingdom, and post-independence the two countries inherited the same borders, but the two sides had a different perception of the border. So at two locations, that is at Kalapani and Susta, minor differences existed between the two countries, but until recently it was always treated as a minor border dispute. But in 2020, when India published a new political map following the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir, India retained its decades-old position and showed Kalapani and Susta as belonging to Indian sovereignty. This issue was immediately exploited by pro-China leaders such as KP Oli, who was the then Prime Minister of Nepal, who unnecessarily escalated the Kalapani dispute and ensured that even Nepal's parliament adopted a constitutional amendment to come out with a new map that showed Kalapani as Nepali territory. For several decades, Kalapani has been under Indian administration as part of the Pithoradgarh district in Uttarakhand. But the sudden aggression being displayed by Nepal under KP Oli triggered tensions in the relationship in 2020 and 2021. And as a result, the ties between the two countries have been affected over the last couple of years. So as you can see, the India-Nepal relationship is indeed a complex relationship that has seen a lot of ups and downs. So now that KP Oli is out of power, and now that India has a friendly Prime Minister in Nepal, the two countries made an attempt to take the relationship forward, which explains the recent visit of Nepal's Prime Minister to India. During this visit, a lot of positive outcomes were seen. For example, the two countries finally operationalized an important railway link of around 35 kilometers in length, which connects Jayanagar in Bihar with Kurta in Nepal, thus promoting cross-border railway links. The inauguration of this project was pending for more than 1.5 years, but finally, this important connectivity project has been operationalized. Then India-Nepal also inaugurated a power project, which involves a 90-kilometer, 132 kilovolt double-circuit transmission line connecting Thila to Mirchaya. This project has been constructed with a concessional loan from India's Exim Bank, along with a decision to fund 12 hydropower projects in Nepal in the Solu corridor. See, India has always been a key player in Nepal's power and hydropower sector, and India has not only been trying to exploit Nepal's hydropower potential, but has also been trying to export electricity to Nepal by interconnecting our power grids. Previously, India had faced many challenges in the execution of such energy and hydropower projects, but now things are looking up, as Nepal's electricity authority has concluded power purchase agreements to the tune of 325 megawatts with India. Apart from this, India has also agreed to extend technical cooperation in the railway sector And finally, India managed to convince Nepal to join the International Solar Alliance, which is an ambitious renewable energy initiative that is backed by India. Then, during the visit of Nepal's Prime Minister, India has also guaranteed reliable petroleum supplies to Nepal, which is heavily dependent on India through the Indian Oil Corporation. Then, both sides also revisited the Mahakali Treaty of 1996, under which a mega project is being taken up known as the Pancheshwar Multi-Purpose Project. The Pancheshwar Multi-Purpose Project is all set to come up on the Mahakali River, or also known as the Sarda River, which is at the source of the Kala Pani dispute. And the project has been delayed for several years as a result of the boundary dispute. But now, as the tensions between India and Nepal have reduced over the Kala Pani dispute, and as both the countries are employing dialogue and negotiations as a tool to resolve the dispute, an opening has been created to take forward the Pancheshwar Multi-Purpose Project, which will benefit both the countries immensely. This mega project will not only generate hydropower for both the countries, but will also help in flood management, thus bringing enormous benefits to Nepal and as well as to India. So as India has gotten busy in repairing this complex relationship with Nepal, Nepal has recently opened up with the United States as well. And just a few weeks back, the United States has provided a financial aid of $500 million to Nepal, which has been ratified by the Nepali Parliament as well, through an American aid institution known as MCC, or the Millennium Challenge Corporation. These funds will be primarily used to invest in the power and road sector of Nepal, and this growing closeness of Nepal with US and the ongoing repair in the India-Nepal relationship has ticked off China. China has always been very interested in Nepal since the 1970s and has been an active influencer in the country, which has always tried to counter the Indian influence. China's primary interest in Nepal arises from the fact that Nepal is also home to Tibetan refugees, and as Nepal has been firmly under India's security fold since 1950s, China has actively tried to counter the Indian influence while keeping an eye on the activities of Tibetan refugees in Nepal. Since then, China has actively promoted its influence through its own investments in the country and has tried countering India in every domain. China has been trying to cultivate its influence with key leaders and key institutions, including Nepal's police and armed forces. And it has also countered India's investments in the power sector and connectivity projects by offering alternate access to Chinese seaports in order to reduce Nepal's dependency on Indian seaports. It even convinced Nepal to join the Belt and Road Initiative and has taken up important railway and road projects that link Tibet with Nepal, and these Chinese-built roads and railway lines are coming almost close to the Indian border. China has also taken up airport projects in Nepal, especially at Pokhara and Lumbini, and it has also taken up cultural initiatives to revive Buddhist heritage sites at Lumbini. Along with this, China has even stepped up its defense and security relations with Nepal, and the two countries today are even conducting joint military exercises along with close intelligence cooperation. As a result of this growing Chinese influence, India holds China responsible for the recent rise of anti-India sentiments in the country, and India sees China to be blocking several important Indian initiatives in order to cut Indian influence. On similar lines, China even opposed the recent American aid to Nepal, and this shows China as a major irritant in the India-Nepal relationship. So the writer argues that repairing the complex India-Nepal relationship will require a proactive effort from both the countries, considering the challenges and issues that are present. So to further strengthen the relationship amidst all these challenges, especially with regard to the challenge posed by China, it's very important for India and Nepal to engage with each other through dialogue and negotiations to resolve their differences, especially the border dispute. And India will have to make that extra effort to remain in the good books of Nepal by being more sensitive to its core concerns and also by showing more generosity with regard to funds and aids to the country. Now let's take up another column from page number 6, written by R.K. Raghavan, the former director of CBI. The CBI, or the Central Bureau of Investigation, happens to be India's elite investigating agency, and yet it has attracted a lot of controversy, primarily because of its lack of institutional autonomy. There have been widespread allegations since several years that India's investigating agencies, including the CBI, have been subverted and have become subordinate to the executive, particularly to the political class. There have been accusations that India's investigating agencies, such as CBI and as well as Enforcement Directorate and IT Department, have often been misused by the ruling parties to target their political opponents and also to mislead investigations in order to bring electoral benefits to the political party. These allegations are nothing new and they have persisted from decades, and subsequent governments and ruling parties are known to have misused India's investigating agencies to fulfill their political purpose. This affects justice and erodes the faith of the Indian public in India's investigating agencies. This matter has come up for discussion again because recently the Chief Justice of India, N.V. Ramanna, strongly criticized the lack of independence and institutional autonomy of India's investigating agencies, particularly that of the CBI. He expressed great concern at the subordination of India's investigating agencies to the executive, and the manner in which they are being misused by the political class directly affects the quality of justice in the country. So he called upon the investigators, especially the senior level and mid-level officers, to stand up within the organization and to refuse to yield under any unethical pressure that might be brought upon them by the political class. In this context, the writer reminds us that in several instances, the Supreme Court has been strongly critical of the way in which the CBI has been functioning. In fact, a few years back, the Supreme Court had even referred to the CBI as a caged parrot, which simply sings according to the tunes of its political masters. There have been several instances in the past where the Supreme Court has taken a stand on this issue, and for example, in the 1997 Hawala case, Justice J.S. Verma had strongly criticized the functioning and the efficiency of CBI, and later even prescribed a new selection procedure for selecting the CBI chief, so that an independent, upright and honest officer is chosen as the chief of the CBI, that is, as the director of the agency, and also provided for a security of tenure for the CBI chief of 2 years, so that the director could function freely without any political interference or fear. Because until then, CBI chiefs were being appointed and removed at the whims and fancies of the government. But a guaranteed security of tenure helps in protecting the independence of the director. Here the writer points out that the agency suffers from many structural issues, such as an investigative body has been placed under the DOPT or the Department of Personnel and Training, which directly reports to the Prime Minister. While this does provide an opportunity to the director of CBI to have direct access to the PM, but this structural arrangement has often been criticized because it has made the CBI more vulnerable to political interference from the ruling party. The writer argues that investigating agencies like the CBI should have their own independence and autonomy, and they can't be placed under unrelated departments such as the DOPT. Then coming to the process of selection and the tenure of the CBI chief, even though a better process has been put in place, there have been recent instances where CBI chiefs themselves have subverted the system in collusion with political elements. This not only brings a bad name to the entire organization, but also affects the morale and motivation of the senior, mid-level and low-level officials. So despite repeated intervention from the Supreme Court itself, the organization is still vulnerable to political misuse. And hence the writer argues that the only way to save the organization and to protect its independence and autonomy is to ensure that the organization gets a strong and virtuous leader as its director, who has a firm belief in the law of the land and in ethical principles, because such a director will definitely get an opportunity to present his views directly in front of the PM when required, thus standing up for the autonomy of the organization and as well as to protect his officials from any unnecessary political interference from other members of the ruling party. So the writer says that to reform India's investigating agencies, we need to have a candid conversation about the issues that are plaguing the institutions. And it is very critical to have strong leaders to head these institutions who have a proven record with regard to their integrity and honesty. And you need such leaders who have a firm belief in law and ethics to place India's investigating agencies on the path of virtue. Next, on page number 9, the Hindu carries a beautiful article that brings out the differences between realism and liberalism in the world of international relations. It essentially brings out the debate between the realist school of thought and the liberal school of thought. This debate has come up for discussion in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict because liberal thinkers are arguing that the Russia-Ukraine war is the war of an authoritarian Russia against democratic Ukraine. Whereas realists are arguing that the Russia-Ukraine war is just the outcome or the culmination of the post-Cold War power games involving the Western powers and the Soviet Union. And essentially the geopolitical power games between the Western countries and Russia has led to the war where Russia is being seen as the only aggressor. So in this context, it is important to understand the key differences between the realist school of thought and the liberal school of thought in international relations. And this basic understanding of the core theories in political science and international relations can help you across multiple subjects in your exams, including in GS paper 2 under IR, and as well as in your ethics and essay paper, along with helping those who have chosen political science and IR as their optional subject. See, these theories in PSIR, they basically describe and try to understand and anticipate the behavior of states. If you look at the school of liberalism, there are three essential core beliefs. The first belief is that under the liberal school of thought, states are believed to be the main actors in the international system. That is, the role of states is given primacy, and it is assumed that it is only the states which can influence international relations. Second, it believes that the internal characteristics of a state varies from one state to another, and this essentially defines that state's behavior. For example, a state like Communist China would be inclined to display its expansionist and territorial tendencies, thus showing military and diplomatic aggression in international relations. Whereas a diverse and tolerant state like India would pursue a non-aggressive approach and focus on peace and negotiations while seeking to strengthen its power status. And a state like Pakistan, which is rife with internal divisions and religious and sectarian divides, is bound to bring that experience into its international relations as well, and will not hesitate in using terrorism as a weapon or as a tool in its foreign policy. So essentially, the internal dimensions of every country, of every state, varies, and this defines its external behavior. And the third core belief under liberalism is that certain governance models are good, whereas few governance models are bad. Basically, liberalism sees the world in black and white and treats democracy to be good, whereas authoritarian dictatorship to be bad. So critics point out that liberalism provides for an optimistic outlook, but at the same time, it provides for a very simplistic model which doesn't account for the complex dimensions that are involved in international relations. See, when the Cold War ended in 1991, several liberal thinkers argued that the Western liberal democracy model had won, and they championed this as the final and only form of human government which could bring peace to the world and stability to the world. Because liberal thinkers like Francis Fukuyama argued that liberal states and liberal democracies, they inherently pursue peaceful choices, thus leading to stable and friendly relations, whereas authoritarian states seek to expand their power at the expense of others, thus triggering conflicts. But however, this explanation of liberal thinkers happens to be a very simplistic explanation, because if this were to be entirely true, then liberal Western democracies wouldn't have gotten involved in any conflicts, and we would all be living in a peaceful world order. So while the model does provide for an optimistic outlook, it doesn't account for the realistic aspects that exist on the ground. Hence, it is often said that liberalism views the world as to what the world ought to be. That is how the world should be. So in many ways it is idealistic, and though it presents an optimistic model, it has its limitations. Whereas realism, on the other hand, or the realist school of thought, projects how the world actually is on the ground and accounts for the realistic dimensions. See, under liberalism, there are three major interconnected frameworks. The school of liberal thought is based on economic interdependence, democratic peace, and international institutions. Liberal thinkers have argued that if economic interdependence is created amongst democracies through globalization, then automatically it reduces the chance of conflict as countries are interconnected through a globalized economy, and the cost of war on one country will equally affect the other country as well, thus preventing and reducing conflicts. It also believes in democratic peace, that inherently democracies do not go to war with each other, and rather they seek out peaceful relations. And liberal thinkers place their belief in international institutions to govern relations between countries and to handle disputes and conflicts. And they believe that international institutions can bring more stability to the world order by helping resolve disputes and conflicts in a fair manner. But again, one wishes if this were only true. Because in the past, we have seen such models fail. And if you need an example, look at how the League of Nations that was established after the First World War failed to prevent the start of the Second World War. In fact, in many ways, the League of Nations itself contributed to some of the factors that eventually led to the Second World War. The League of Nations was so ineffective that within few years it was disbanded after the Second World War and a new international institution was created known as the United Nations. But if you evaluate the role of the UN over the years, you will know that the UN has been equally ineffective in preventing conflicts and in establishing peace. And on many occasions, the UN itself has been misused by the big powers, especially by the P5 countries, to play their own geopolitical power games, thus making the UN itself an ineffective international organization. Then even globalization has not been a deterrent, and in many ways, globalized economic factors have actually contributed to wars in the world. For example, the pursuit of oil by few countries has led to decades-long destabilization of entire regions. So essentially, the liberalism school of thought does provide a valid interpretation regarding the behavior of a state, but unfortunately it happens to be too idealistic and optimistic, and it comes with its own limitations. This is where the realist school of thought comes in, that understands and anticipates the behavior of states based on how the world actually is, by taking a look at the ground realities. This is seen as a more pragmatic approach, as it defines the real nature of the world order, especially the behavior of states. Under realism, there are three basic premises, which includes human nature realism, defensive realism, and offensive realism. Under the concept of human nature realism, or also known as classical realism, the behavior of states is equated with the behavior and nature of humans. Because at the end of the day, a state is made up of humans, and their thinking, their psyche, their anger, their greed eventually motivates the behavior of the state as well. If humans are greedy for more resources, if they are greedy for more power, this is bound to get reflected in the behavior of the state as well. As humans generally prefer an expansion of their power status and influence, the states ruled by those humans would also display a similar behavior. So essentially, if a country is ruled by an aggressive authoritarian leader, most likely the state's internal and external policies are also going to be aggressive. So such expansionist behavior of states will eventually trigger conflicts. And this understanding helps us to take a more realistic outlook with regard to the behavior of states. The defensive realists, on the other hand, they don't believe that states are inherently aggressive. Thinkers like Kenneth Waltz have argued that the fundamental aim of a state is survival. Any state aims to survive from any threats and adopts aggression only as a defensive mechanism. As per this theory, states display controlled aggression only when they are trying to defend their position, defend their resources, and defend their integrity. On the other hand, we also have a theory known as offensive realism, under which thinkers like John Mearsheimer have argued that great powers and big powers, they always seek to maximize their power at the expense of their rivals, and they will not hesitate from adopting offensive aggression in order to change the status quo and to secure and protect their interests. So the realist schools of thought provide a more realistic interpretation of how the world actually is. But this doesn't take away the advantages provided by the liberal school of thought as well. So the discussion here is not about evaluating which school of thought is better than the other. It's about understanding the nuances of both the schools of thought and how they help us in understanding and predicting and anticipating the behavior of states. Next, on page number 7, we have a column that deals with the India-Australia relations and closely evaluates the free trade agreement that was signed between the two countries, known as ECTA, or the Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. But I've already covered this discussion in detail on the 3rd of April, and the link for the same shall be attached in the description box below. So kindly watch this analysis first, and then you can go through the column once. Now let's take a look at the mains practice questions. The first question: India-Nepal relationship has seen a lot of ups and downs in the recent past owing to the complex nature of issues. Examine how this relationship can be repaired by India. The second question: the CBI has been widely criticized for its lack of autonomy. Critically evaluate the path needed to fix the structural issues plaguing the organization. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post your answers in the answer writing portal, for which the link shall be given in the description box below. So this concludes our discussion for the day, and if you're finding the initiative to be helpful, don't forget to like, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching.